Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great coffee break with happy connections. And we're going to start now with the rise of the heroes. So I would like to call for the 4 heroes that are going to present us their stories of activism for river protection around the world. And they are Anna Lazowska from Macedonia. Please come on stage. They are Robert Kugonza from Uganda, Philip Fernside and from Brazil, and David Blake from UK. Please come on stage so we can start all together. Please have a seat. And I'm gonna start presenting you Anne. You can go directly there if you like. Anne Lazowska from Macedonia. She leads a center of environmental research and information in Macedonia called EcoSvest. And she's also a policy officer in WWF Adria. She led an 8-year campaign to stop 2 large energy infrastructure projects and save Mavroro National Park. And with that, she's been awarded with the prestigious Goldman Environmental Award in 2019, and she's gonna tell us a story about how one can make a difference, right? Welcome, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. It's definitely been one that's a long-awaited moment for me. I've been waiting for this for, 2 years almost, yeah? So I'm really thankful that I'm attending the River Summit. I missed the last one. Thanks also for the opportunity to be the icebreaker of this great session today, and I hope you really enjoy it. My inspiration comes from the fact that all of us are actually making a difference in our own environments, in our local communities. And thanks for presenting me. I come from Macedonia. My country recently changed their name into North Macedonia. There's a map. North Macedonia is located in the Western Balkans, which is also the Southeast Europe, and that's a lot of geography in one sentence, but the map is there for all of you who don't really know where it is. Yeah, so my story begins and it evolves around the National Park of Mavrovo, which is a very beautiful area, pristine environment, pristine area, abundant with water and beautiful mountains like the one on the picture. And of course, this is an area, I didn't have any attachment to this area before in my life. I just knew, okay, this is a national park. It's been proclaimed in 1949 and then expanded in 1952. This is one of the oldest parks in Europe, so it must be a great place. And very recently, there are just photos of 2 beautiful rivers. Very recently, the one on the left was proclaimed as the UNESCO Natural Heritage Site. This is the Deep River. And there, up there, you can see the spring. This is a very special one that it's looks like a waterfall. And then the one on the right was also a place where that was at stake in the campaign. And very, very interestingly enough, the National Park of Mavrovo is the home of one of very precious and special species. This is the Balkan lynx, so it's subspecies of the Eurasian lynx, and its population is very small. Around 40 individuals are found to be still reproducing in National Park of Mavrovo and the surrounding, let's say, areas and bordering regions. And all of this would have been great if my country did not look into the possibilities of changing their energy sector. Our country is very much dependent on coal, so we produce our electricity from coal-fired thermal power plants mostly, and a little bit of hydro, but with this intention to kind of diversify the energy mix and to kind of comply with what the energy community has been demanding, the increase of the renewable energy sources in the energy mix. The government dug up the old plans from the 1980s to construct 2 large hydropower projects, and guess where? In the National Park of Mavrovo. So interestingly enough, one of these projects was to affect the previously shown river and the valley of the river. And the other one was actually supposed to be built on the right one, and it is directly in the core reproductive area or the critical habitat of the Balkan links. So we decided basically to start this advocacy campaign. I learned about the project in 2010, around that year. And it was a huge shock for me to realize that the government would at all propose such projects from one hand, and on the other hand, they would find international financial institutions to actually support these projects by giving loans. This was a shock because I knew that, we, in our environmental brains, let's say, we think about protection, we think about preservation of our nature, we think national parks. This is something that I want to promote also to the outside world, not just to the country. And this is something that should be preserved and not something that should be used as a resource for electricity production. The Balkan Links is a national symbol. We have a coin at the back of the coin. There is a lynx, and we also have a coin with a fish. And when it comes to river protection, normally we would be kind of first thinking, okay, let's use the fish coin. But the lynx is very cuddly and very sweet and cute, and nobody can resist. It's a cat. And this was one of these kind of campaigns that we did. In 2011, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development that has just approved the loan for the Boshkov Most project, the one located in the critical habitat of the Balkan Links, held their meeting, and I went there in London carrying these boxes, these fancy boxes with the coins. And while I gave the presentation on the risks of this project to the environment and also to the habitat of the Balkan Links, I presented these coins to the board of directors, asking them, does wildlife have a price? Can you put a price tag on our remaining population that's nearly extinct? And this is what shocked them. And the inspiration behind this coin was actually Marco. Marco was the first GPS-collared lynx, and this is why one can make a difference. Marco was one of the lynxes that was GPS-collared and monitored by the Macedonian Ecological Society through the Balkan Lynx Recovery Program that is running in the country. And basically, the scientists found that this particular individual is intensively using the region where the hydropower plant is supposed to be built. And when I showed these maps to the board of directors, they were also shocked. We also filed a complaint to the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development because they did not follow their own procedures when they decided for this project to happen. They didn't know. They were shocked. Their faces went white when we presented this information, which means the board of directors did not have all the information at hand when they made the decision. Interestingly enough, a few years later, the complaint was proven to be valid, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development independent expert showed that this complaint was well-founded and that the bank did breach its own procedures. But this was just one of these interesting advocacy campaigns that we had. Of course, Lynxy, cuddly, beautiful animal. You can't bring him to Strasbourg, but you can definitely bring the cuddly little lynxes that would do the protest. This is at the building of the Council of Europe. We organized together with the Macedonian Ecological Society and Front 2142, our partner organizations. We organized the protest of the little lynxes at the time when the Berne Convention was drafting the recommendation towards my country. In 2013, we actually filed a complaint as well to the Berne Convention. This mechanism is very interesting. It's a very political one. It's not going to fine your country for breaching the Berne Convention, but it's a very political one, and it's very useful when it comes to international players. We knew that at that time, if we target our national laws, it will do nothing basically towards the two banks, the World Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We had to go higher. So the Berne Convention was one of the mechanisms that we used, and that year, 2015, was the one that the recommendation for stopping of all hydropower plants in Mavrovo was decided on at the standing committee, so it was quite successful, I would say. And of course, our work would not have happened as it did if we did not work with scientists. I mentioned before the Macedonian Ecological Society, but a lot more scientists and organizations from all over Europe supported our cause. This is just a petition that we ran for quite some time for stopping the dams in Mavrovo, and a lot of organizations joined. Organizations such as Euronatur and Riverwatch and Bankwatch were there all along. And what was even more important than when you have this European, let's say, magnifying glass on your local problem, you can get international media to talk about this. You can highlight the case in important meetings, and you can actually make a lot bigger influence. Of course, we also did fun things. It was not just meetings and complaints. It was also kayaking in front of the governmental building. It's very hard, by the way. It's very challenging to move. This is the governmental building, and we did a little protest. I just wanted to say, again, a small number of people. We were mostly 4 or 5 in the campaign, and this protest was around 20 people. Most of them came from Slovenia, by the way, with their kayaks on their backs. And this is just one person dressed as a lynx walking around the streets of Skopje talking about the problem with random citizens. And it was a small group of people all along, but with a huge impact. And the government was quite sensitive to our protest and our press releases because, as they once said, we thought NGOs are small flies, that we can just shoot them. But after this campaign, we realized that they are flies that can bite. So we did manage to make some kind of a difference. The end result of the campaign are these 2 lovely screenshots from the pages of the World Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And you can see that both were cancelled as loans. The World Bank withdrew immediately after the Berne Convention recommendation came out. Basically, the following month, they were already out of the project. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development had already signed an agreement with our government for the loan, and they waited for 2 more years for the loan to to expire. They wanted to be the gentleman in this case. And then we waited till January 2017 for this to happen. You would say that this story is like a dream, you know, but it was not that easy, and sometimes it was a nightmare. And as soon as we started having some influence, especially in the international world, we received a lot of threats and intimidation and a lot of, let's say, negative energy from the side of the government or investors or, companies. And I am very much concerned when I hear the information about more than 200 environmental and human rights defenders have lost their lives in 2020. We don't understand the difficulties that these people are facing unless we are one of them, yeah? And I realized along the way that I was also one of these people that were intimidated and threatened all the time, but I just put it on the side because in my head, I could see the vision. I wanted Mavrovo without dams. And that was the driving force, that was the cause. And do you really think that, that governments or companies would intimidate us and would threaten us if they knew that one could not make a difference? So the story, as bittersweet as it is a successful story, but it is not done.
You have 2 minutes.
Thanks, I'm finishing, yeah. Talking about our safety, my heart goes to Alberto Curamil. I don't know how many of you know him. He's our fellow river protector from Chile. And my fellow Goldman Prize winner in 2019, Alberto could not come to San Francisco to pick his prize because he was in prison. And after that, he was shot and again imprisoned and deprived of medical help. And he's just one example of how one person is strong enough to lead a whole movement. Alberto is fighting 2 dam projects that are planned in his community, and he's protecting the local Mapuche community and his lands there. So I want to leave you on a positive note. I think that we as individuals are able to do so much more. We are able to motivate others. We are able to mobilize whole communities. We are able to motivate and mobilize the international community. And we do that because we speak truthfully and we speak from the heart when we protect our rivers. And that's something to be respected, and it's something that we should take with pride, and we should never be afraid if anyone tries to stop us. So I leave you with this lovely photo of a baby lynx and his mother, showing hope that we can succeed, we can protect our rivers, and we can make sure that wildlife is free and happy in our surroundings. So thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you so much, Anne. Yeah, please have a seat. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I would like to invite next Robert Kugonza. He's coming from Uganda. For over 15 years, he has been working in dam issues and rights of people that are affected by them. And as a coordinator of African Rivers Network and also as a dam and energy officer at NAP. He's now leading Friends with Environment in Development as an environment and social initiative in Uganda, and he's totally devoted and passionate for his work and to make the world a better place. So thank you for being with us, and let's hear your story about the pain of damming rivers in Africa, a case of Uganda. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much for that exciting introduction. And I want to take the opportunity also to welcome every one of you who have managed to come here, but also to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to come and share with you this experience. Because the time is limited, the introduction given to me is quite enough, and as you can read, but we have the chance to still contact after here and talk as long as we're still around. Yeah, I'm talking about the pain of damming rivers in Africa, a case of Uganda. A background is that in Africa, dams have been developed under the guise of lighting the otherwise termed the dark continent, and whether that darkness is to the skin like mine or dark in terms of a lack of light, I don't know. One of those or both apply to eradicate also poverty and development. Dams present a picture of energy needs solution and development, mainly because that is what those who promote them choose to talk about, because they have the platform. And because they want to use that to amass or to amalgamate around them social and community support and financial institutions support for their projects. In Africa, a recent count that was 2000, in August actually, this year, put the number of total large dams at 980, and more than half of those are in South Africa. So despite this picture of rosy and talking about good and the need to light Africa, dams have more than harm, and that goes that with them, that if they all are to be in a proper and free and fair critical lens, the choices may, in many cases, be alternative to dams. Some of these pains can be seen in the following: exorbitant costs or channels of corruption. The dams in Africa, and especially Uganda, that I talk for Africa because, like I have been introduced, at one point I have had a chance of coordinating the African Rivers Network. That was an Africa-wide network that was working with organizations in different countries in Africa to look, that brought us together to look into what is affecting us in terms of river, how they are managed, and dams, and the impact, social and environmental impacts. So they are expensively built, much more than necessary is spent on them. They are thereby increasing poor taxpayers' burden, and that I don't think can be a development, because the promoters always say we need power or we need energy for development. At the time of its construction, and at the cost of around $1,000 million, the most controversial and overestimated 250 megawatts Bujagali Dam was said to be 3 times more expensive than any dam of the same size in the world. That is where corruption now is in. When we were still struggling to come to terms with that, in 2018, after it had been completed, the government was still finding it not being able to meet its expectations. And the reason, of course, is that much of the money that was asked was not put to the dam as such. It was used in their way. And they needed to borrow even more to get to put to the bank to be able to get a refinance package estimated at $500 million, in addition to tax breaks and longer repayment plan. And if that was not enough, I wish that was enough. There were also pains affecting communities and persons. Poor and delayed compensation packages of the affected community members. This is too much. I cannot have enough time to explain, but I have, in my different roles and in different organizations, even before I founded and became the director of Friends with Environment in Development, with my work with African Rivers Network, with my work with National Association of Environmental, NAPE, and as also facilitator for dam dialogues in Uganda. There were a lot of human rights abuses, poor payments, and the reasons are obvious that they get the money instead of paying the people who are affected. The money is put to their own use. Poor resettlement action plans and packages, poor land with poor soils, denial resource access, and exposure to new gender-based risk for women and girl children are all part of this. And I put this in red. Why? Because I even did the dam's impact on gender as part of my academic research. And when you look at what comes out, especially in terms of women and children, it is really appalling. For instance, one that the communities that live around the riverine communities are using and accustomed to using the riverine soils, which in themselves, because of the deposits, they have a certain level of richness as compared to others. They also have a macroclimate around them which allows a number of trees to grow. So you find that the women who are the fulcrums of production are digging a certain size, for instance, let me say a half an acre, and are able to produce so much. Let me put it at 20 bags of cabbage. And they are also saving time, because when they need firewood, they can run to the forest around the river and collect the dry branches. Now comes the dam, he uproots these people and say, we are giving you resettlement, so we are giving you land for land now. 2 acres for 2 acres on a dry hill, prone to erosion and poor soils. And the lady or the woman who used 1 acre to produce 20 bags of cabbage can only now be able to use the same size of land and produce probably 5. And that you call that it is compensation for land and for land, so that you are better. And there is a way they also doing them. Sometimes they look at her house or his house and give them a little bit of baked brick house and say, now you are rich. Actually, in the Bujagali case, which is one of the most controversial dams, they deceived these people. They say, in Kampala, there is an affluent or rich people area called Muyenga, where the rich live. And so when they put these people in where they put, they said, you are now people living in Muyenga, and they call the village Muyenga. So to tell them that you are also now rich. But these people suffered a lot after, when they cannot be able to produce as they produce, taking too much energy to produce so little, but not able to access the firewood like they did, but to go and look for them. There is the next forest is called Mabira Forest, and they have to walk about 7 kilometers to access the forest, and they are passing through sugarcane plantation, and there they meet the rapers, the defilers, and a lot of that has gone on badly. So that is the pain of so-called development. And I wonder why in EIA, when they are doing the assessment, they are measuring about the size of the land, but they do not look at how fertile the land is, how productive it's going to be in terms of what it has been producing and how it will produce. So the pain borne by the affected communities is too much, it is cruel, it is not deserving, especially for people the project proponents claim to develop. Over 10 complaints were lodged to the World Bank Inspection Panel, IFC accountability mechanisms, up to the CAO, the ombudsman of the World Bank. for Bujagali alone, and more were launched in African Development Bank because it funded the transmission line, and EIB, which also is a co-financer. And in those, all those, I talked about the cost of the dam, but if you see that eventually that all the costs, for instance, of us civil societies, the energy, the time, the engagement, the partnership that we create with our networks, and the time that goes, if you value that, if you look at the time and the torture and the time lost of the affected community in trying to achieve the little they can achieve, or in consideration of what they have lost, if you consider the banks the financial institutions themselves, because when we put these campaigns to the banks, 85% they found our complaints were true. And they had at one time to hold their funding. Actually, the project stopped for about 6 months. Because we challenged them on their safeguard, environmental and social safeguard policies, and they said, you have to address this to the project proponents. And of course, this did not go well with the government, so we became enemies. As civil society, we became enemies. We were said to be collaborators with outside to distract development, and that is what we became. And up to now, the civil society space in Uganda is continuing to become. They develop policies now to reduce their freedom of operation, to make sure you are renewing maybe your license every year, so that if you have done something, then they have a reason to not renew your license, and so on and so forth.
You have 3 minutes now.
Oh, good. And if you look at this, you'll see that in spite of us raising, among other concerns, that the Bujagali Dam was too expensive in comparison to the money that was being spent, and them not listening, after 8 years, including 7 of operation, the president, this quote is from one of the FedEx journalists, says, President Museveni, who has made hydropower generation for industrialization, one of his pet subjects was duped to believing that Bujagali would generate 250 of electricity of electricity. That was the former Minister of Energy, who was in charge when we were making all these challenges and telling them the truth. And he kept quiet then. Now he steps out to another ministry and he is talking. That can happen in Uganda. And he's not even penalized for not doing what he did, but instead they are promoted. I don't know whether that happens to other countries. Other dams in similar situation, we have Karuma, nearly complete now. Over 3,000 persons are affected yet, and have not, many of them have not been compensated. Isimba Dam, submerged Kalagara Falls, which had been agreed upon in Bujagali development because they were below Bujagali as an offset, but now they have been submerged because Isimba had been agreed that they would not be developed. Aswa Dam is also threatening over 2,050 people with possible evictions. Aswa Dam 1 and 3 and 5 are also yet to start, and we are working, my organization are working with the communities in those areas. If you see, in terms of the pain that is going through, you can see the poor women are being evicted in the village of Karuma Dam, now which is being built and near to be completed. The women are trying to get whatever they can grab from their old structures so that they can move with it wherever they are going, where they have not been compensated as yet. You see their property thrown outside. You see the Chinese contractors of Sinohydro And by the way, when we tried to, we complained to the World Bank and EIB, and so they followed their policies a bit when we wake them up, and they stopped the funding. Now the government said, our president said, I'm not going to be borrowing from the World Bank because of their so many restrictions. Now he turned to China because China doesn't care. As long as the president said, do the work, whether they are dying, whether they are burying you alive, they don't care. So you can see them. They are even trying to participate in eviction of the communities. Here is the progress of Karuma. It is beyond this now because some of those have already been filled by water. Of course, the ecological destruction and of all those dams. Time is not on my side. Yeah, and yeah, the loss of these, what you see here, those are students on this other side, the other side. And in every day in Bujagali Dam before it was dammed, every day from year to year end, you'd find not less than 1,000 people per day going to that dams for tourism, for learning purposes. And down the Kalagara Falls, which I have just said has been subjected, which was supposed to be the offset, is where this rafting was taking place, which is now no more. And these are now the lake, the dammed lake that occupy where the falls that you have seen behind. And culture also has also been affected. This is a spiritual leader in one of the tribes in the area, the Basoga, and his shrine where all the people who believe in that tradition used to go and worship was submerged. And he died also without even being compensated. When it became difficult in negotiations, the government decided to create a quack, another Bujagali, to show the world and the World Bank and the EIB that they have compensated when the Rio one, they had left him aside. Why dams continue to be built despite their negatives? One is political accountability as performance milestones, so that they can ask terms of leadership regardless of their real contribution, because the majority of the people will see the structure and say, yes, they have done something. Our president, our government has done something, regardless of what. They don't know that they have actually put a rope in their neck. There is a means for undetectable corruption. For instance, whereas $1,000 million was 3 times the same kind of dam elsewhere, yet they had to ask even 500 more. But if you look at the initial cost of Karuma Dam, which is supposed to be 600 megawatts, which is now being built, the initial was 1.7. It has now jumped, as we talk now, to $2.2 billion. In comparison, you would look at the Grand Ethiopian Resistance Dam, which is 6,000 megawatts, and the cost is $6.4 billion. So you would find that ours is exorbitantly expensive. Actually, 1 mega, I don't know, if you look, you see that 1 megawatt is being built at a very high cost in comparison to what, because the 6,000 megawatts are being produced by 6 billion, and 2 billion point two is only producing just 600 megawatts. And this is also not to say that it is a sure deal that those powers, because sometimes they inflate what will come out, and what comes out after is not the real one. Good business, yeah, the banks want to give the money because they are gaining. Now China has come in and it has become business, and they are giving us even worse, much of not, instead, I mean, in addition to not listening to human rights, but they are also giving us substandard. They have built Simba Dam, and they are building Karuma Dam. All of them in the process of building, they are cracking. but they are doing business. Now, allow me to say this slowly as I finish, sorry. What needs to be done? I have observed, and I don't know, members, if you have observed this, that there is something fundamentally wrong, and this is to do with EIA and who funds EIA. In my country, as I know, in Africa as well, but I think everywhere, is that the project proponent is the one who is supposed to solicit and fund the EIA practitioner. And this practitioner is therefore supposed to be in a position, a neutral position of saying this project will not measure to the standards, it should not go. But remember that the one who pays you money is your boss. And as your boss, you have the obligation to give him positive results. I think we are going to knock our heads on the wall for long as we do not refocus our attention and try to advocate against this, so that there is another approach of how environmental impact assessments can be funded, so that people do not have a conflict of interest in doing their EIA.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much for your real story. And now I would like to invite Philip Fernside to come on board and present us his stories from Brazil's Amazonian rivers dammed. And Philip comes from Brazil, from the Amazon state, from Manaus, from the National Institute Research of Amazonia, to tell us about his experience and his story. And he's been for many years already dedicated to write about environmental and social problems in Amazonia, and working on greenhouse gas emission from dams, bringing attention to these topics even when there's a lot of resistance from government and other interests. And he has been working on the impacts of dams on a lot of ongoing legal, academic, and grassroots struggles. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
We have the wrong presentation. Okay, well, let me start explaining.
We need the presentation of Philip on stage, please. For sure, they are taking care of it.
Okay. Well, while this is happening, let me explain a little bit. Right. Well, dams represent a huge problem in Amazonia. Oh, sorry. Okay. There are tremendous plans for building dams in the Amazon. Yeah. Oh, it's been given to them already.
They give it to you.
Oh, yeah.
Is the problem with the file that you found this or that?
They have a problem with the file, which they had before. Yeah. Anyway, Brazil has a tremendous role in hydropower in all sorts of aspects, including the greenhouse gas emission question. There have been a series of dams that have been built over the years, beginning in the 1970s in Amazonia, and there are huge plans for building more dams. A lot of what happens will depend on decisions that are now approaching in the National Congress. There's a bill that was submitted by President Bolsonaro in February last year that would open indigenous areas and areas that are protected for biodiversity for hydroelectric dams, in addition to agribusiness and mining, all sorts of other things. And that is moving rapidly through the Congress. In May this year, both houses of Congress were captured by the coalition of political parties that supports the president's agenda there. And also the environmental licensing structure is being dismantled in Brazil since the current president took office in January 2019. There have been many, many changes, some legislative and hundreds of changes at the ministerial level that can be done just by the minister signing a document. And these have undermined very much the licensing process, and there are several other bills that are advancing through the Congress that would do away with licensing basically altogether. So that opens up much more perspective for building the dams that have been planned for years. In 1987, there was a 2010 plan that was launched, which is to the dams that they were planning to build by the year 2010, in addition to a list of other dams that would be built after that. There were 79 dams, very large dams, over 100 megawatts each in the Amazon region of Brazil. And that was in 1987. Then in 1988, we had the new constitution in Brazil, which gave more rights to indigenous peoples. And so it, I shouldn't say gave more rights, it recognized more rights of indigenous peoples. And that was seen as a great barrier that you couldn't get dams like Belo Monte approved because it would require the National Congress to approve it. And then when Belo Monte came along, it was simply passed in the National Congress, a super urgent regimen with no debate in a matter of hours, and sort of opened the floodgates for contemplating these dams that are planned in indigenous areas, including some very large dams upstream from Belo Monte. So things are looking grave. The 10-year energy expansion plan makes clear that they are waiting for this go-ahead, and there are many more dams planned. Okay, first of all, let me do an advertisement for this website. It has much more about everything I'll be talking about here today, including Portuguese language versions of all the papers and things I'll mention here, and much more information on dams and also deforestation and other problems in Amazonia. I'll talk about some dams in basically chronological order, starting with Balbina, which is just 150 kilometers from Manaus, where I live. Then Tucuruí, over here. Actually, Tucuruí was built before Balbina. Then talk some about the two dams on the Madeira River, Santo Antonio and Girão. Then about Belo Monte over here, and one of the planned dams above it, Babaquara. Then in the Tapajós Basin about São Manuel and Teles Pires, and then just mention the Sinop Dam down here in Mato Grosso. Is it going to go? Okay. Balbina Dam, of course, was a notorious scandal because it's a huge reservoir to generate very little power, also displaces indigenous peoples, and it's unique. There are over 3,000 islands spreading out in the forest. If you look at that area, it doesn't even look like the map of a reservoir. In here, the white is water and the black is land. So you have the islands with live trees, and all these light-colored trees are dead. It just goes on and on. And this is all dead trees. It's a 1-hour flight in a single-engine plane just from one end of the reservoir to the other. Billions of trees. So huge environmental impact. And what gained most attention, of course, was the indigenous people, the Waimiri tribe, which led to the conviction of both Brazil and France of genocide for Balbina in the Bertrand Russell Tribunal in Belgium, which is just a moral condemnation. No one goes to jail. But actually, that wasn't exactly what happened. There were 3,000 Indians there in 1973, and when Balbina was built in the 1980s, there were 356 Indians. So over 80% of them had disappeared, but that wasn't the dam that caused that big thing. It was the Brazilian army when they were building a highway that passes through their lands. There are more details on this. It's now reached in some of the Brazilian courts. And this about the story of Balbina, including this book. Some very tense times for me there. Then the Tucuruí Dam, this huge dam, basically the same size reservoir, but produces a lot more energy. But of course, it has a lot of impacts. There were 23,000 people living along the river that were displaced. They were put in these settlement areas, basically abandoned. And part of this indigenous area was cut off, and this was converted into a settlement area. Then you had the floating water weeds that accumulated along the shore and resulted in a huge plague of mosquitoes there. This is that settlement area, and it was amazing. These are Monsonia mosquitoes. They bite day and night. So, and actually, there were researchers that paid people to sit in chairs and be bitten. They counted over 600 bites per hour. Here, you really had to be there to appreciate it. Anyway, here's a child that's all been bitten. So the people camped out for 2 years trying to get another settlement site. There's the government compound back there. They didn't get anything, so they moved. Here's the Tucuruí Reservoir, this indigenous area. They moved around to the back here in illegal roads for stealing mahogany. Those black dots are deforestation in 2003. So this started deforestation there. And now, today, here it is. There's the reservoir, there's that indigenous area, and the whole area has been deforested. There's more information in these papers here, and there are Portuguese versions on the site. Now, the Madeira dams, Madeira River dams, are another story. This is the Santo Antonio Dam during the 2014 flood on the Madeira River. And you can see there's no room for more water to pass through those floodgates. In fact, 3 of them didn't function. They were plugged up by floating logs. So if just any more of those floodgates had been plugged, or if the flood was a little bit bigger, it would have broken that dam, which is just 7 kilometers above the center of a major city, the Porto Velho, the capital of Rondônia. So you would have had a huge tragedy. And that, of course, is still the facts of the situation there for the next flood. One of the most dramatic impacts was on the fisheries, especially the so-called giant catfish of the Madeira River, which supported a huge population of fishers in Brazil, in Bolivia, and Peru. Just in Brazil, there were 1,500 members of fishermen cooperatives, each with a family of 5 people or so. And that fishery was destroyed. This is Nicinha, leader of the fisheries cooperatives, who was assassinated. Her body was found at the bottom of the Jirau Reservoir, weighted down to the rocks 5 months later, and nothing has happened in the investigations. There's more in these papers here. Again, they're Portuguese versions. Now, Belo Monte, of course, is a famous case with huge impacts still to come. One was having to destroy 1/4 of the city of Altamira, especially the poorest part of the city, and resettle those people. Here's Altamira. And then there are 2 dams, and it detours 80% of the water to the second dam and leaves 130 kilometers of the river with very little water. It includes 2 indigenous areas, and there's a third one here that also depended on the fish in this river, and also a lot of riverside people, the Ribeirinhos. And this has had a dramatic impact on biologically huge, also on transportation, the fisheries, everything supported those people. There's more on what happened this year there, where you had a especially severe case of detouring more of the water than usual. Now, one of the big worries is what can happen upstream. The original plan was to have 6 dams on the Xingu River. Here's Belo Monte, relatively small compared to the others. And these others are almost all in indigenous areas, the blue areas there. And the most likely to be built is this one, Babaquara. The official name has been changed to Altamira, but it's known as Babaquara. And I lived for 2 years over here, more or less, in a planned agricultural village when I was collecting data for my doctoral dissertation. And in 1975, I got in the government office in Altamira the map of these dams showing it was going to flood part of the settlement area I was working in. But of course, that was during the military dictatorship. No one could say anything. But all this is now moving forward years later. So that dam is as big as Tucuruí and Balbina put together in terms of area. You can see the logic here. Belo Monte has very little water, but a huge drop to generate electricity. But it depends on the water that's stored upstream, especially this Babaquara Dam. And of course, the company has not honored the various promises it made to the indigenous people and so forth. There's more information in there. And a lot more in these papers. I think a lot of people would be interested in this, that explains how it happened that you had huge international and national movements to try and stop Belo Monte, and it just went ahead and was built anyway. Now, the 10-year plan that I mentioned has 52 gigawatts of dams that they would like to build in Amazonia. But 23% of that capacity, it's 12 gigawatts, is what doesn't interfere with indigenous lands and these protected areas for biodiversity. All the rest of it interferes, but it makes very clear that that the plans would change if it's permitted. There's a lot more information in this paper about this law that is advancing forward, and their Portuguese version as well. And also the problem with licensing that's being dismantled. Now, in the Tapajós area, you have the São Manuel and the Três Pires dams. These other ones are planned and not built yet. Três Pires flooded the Cachoeira dos Sete Quedas. This is where the spirits of the respected elders of the Munduruku tribe go after they die. So basically, it's equivalent to heaven for Christians. And that was dynamited and then flooded. So total shock for the Munduruku. And this one is only 700 meters from an indigenous area. Everything within 40 kilometers is considered directly impacted by the Brazilian regulations. But no one was consulted, none of the Indians, as required by Brazilian law and also ILO Convention 169. Anyway, this explains how this managed to defeat all the legal system and the environmental agencies in Brazil. Now, the European role in this is important to realize. Energias de Portugal is a major stakeholder in the São Manuel Dam. And they sold part of their interest to China Three Gorges, which is also famous for not being very concerned about the human rights aspects. And just recently, China Three Gorges has sold their part and gotten out of it. Anyway, this is an influence for various dams. The Sinop Dam in Mato Grosso belongs to L'électricité de France, EDF, and it's a long story there about how that overcame the legislation. Now, the financing part is essential. The second Brazilian power sector loan, which was at the time of Balbina, was for imported equipment, and there was a huge controversy about whether the money from taxpayers in Europe and North America was going to build this dam. The World Bank denies it, but the equipment is all foreign. This is Siemens from Germany. This is in Balbina. And the timing and everything indicates that that's indeed where the money went. And the turbines is another question. Both Balbina and Tucuruí, they're from Cruz-au-Loire in France. Some of them built in Grenoble in France, and others in their subsidiary in Taubaté in São Paulo. Now, a big question is what is done with the electricity and the involvement of these companies in this. These are aluminum ingots at Barcarena at the mouth of the Amazon River, waiting to be exported. Basically, that's electricity in a form you can put in a ship and take away. And that factory was sold to Norsk Hydro in 2010, a Norwegian company. And their motto is that aluminum is infinite, but of course it's not infinite. What limits it is the environmental and social impacts of those dams. And ironically, this is a sustainable development report of the Brazilian Association of Aluminum. And it implies that these aluminum ingots are being created by these riverside people in sustainable agroforestry and so forth. And of course, these are the main victims of the dams, and it's being created by the dams. There's a lot more information in these about the aluminum and the environmental justice aspects of this. All of these have Portuguese versions. Now let me just finish talking a little bit about the greenhouse gas emissions. These are methane bubbles coming out of the Santo Antonio Reservoir and the Madeira River. So even a run-of-the-river dam like this produces a lot of methane. And I have to explain that it wasn't I that discovered that dams release greenhouse gases. There was a group in Canada that published a paper in 1993. But this paper of mine in 1995 is what got all of the wrath of the hydro industry concentrated on me. It showed that, for example, that Balbina was worse than fossil fuels. And this is a reaction of the American U.S. Hydropower Association, that it's baloney, it's much overblown. This complete denial then shifted to be, they produce a little bit of greenhouse gas, but much better than anything else. So they did a series of studies, here some of them, about greenhouse emissions from different dams. And then this was attacked by the head of Eletrobras, which is a government company, basically the head person in the Brazilian government for promoting hydroelectric dams. And here talking about the scientific errors in the Fernside comments, and the response was political claiming. Highly recommended reading, including my responses to it. You can see both sides of these things on the website there. Now, let's explain how this works. Here's Tucuruí. The water coming through the spillways is at 20 meters depth, where there's a lot of methane. It's thrown up into the air, and that methane in the water immediately goes into the atmosphere. And then what comes out of the turbines that are deeper down has even more methane. It doesn't have all this turbulence, but it's under high pressure. So it's like when you open a bottle of Coca-Cola, for example, you see those bubbles coming out when you release the pressure. It's the same principle. The methane then comes out in the river just downstream of the dam. So here's Tucuruí Dam with the methane concentrations. In this deeper water, you have a lot of methane. You can calculate how much goes to the spillways and turbines and how much is being released. And so you have a big pulse from when the forest is flooded, and the soil below it, releasing its carbon, is turning into methane. But you can have something that goes on forever. Here you have this big mud flat around the reservoir as the water level goes up and down every year. See the watermark on the trees. And then you have the soft vegetation that grows there. When the water comes up again, that will decay on the bottom of the reservoir, decay quickly because it's not wood, it's soft. And there's no oxygen, so it turns into methane instead of CO2. So basically, it's a methane factory. You're taking carbon out of the atmosphere as CO2 with photosynthesis, and it goes back as methane. It has much more impact on global warming. There's more information in this paper in Nature Climate Change and others. And this report that has just come out from the IPCC in August greatly increases the attention to methane, and that means hydroelectric dams. So for the Kyoto Protocol, what was used was a second IPCC report. The conversion was 21. 1 ton of methane is equal to 21 tons of CO2 in terms of impact on global warming. At the time of the Paris Agreement, it was 28. And what just came out, if you consider 100 years, it's just a little bit later, less than what it was. But finally, the IPCC is recognizing that we don't have 100 years to do something about global warming. If we wait that long, we're going to pass a lot of tipping points. It'll be catastrophic. So what really counts is the next 20 years. And if you consider that, it's 80. That is, you're tripling the impact of hydroelectric dams on global warming. Now, they also calculated a basket of concerns that would have it 50, so at least doubling the impact of hydroelectric dams. Now, the IPCC has some skeletons in its closet with this report on emissions that had hydropower as the cleanest of all possible emissions, better than even the wind and solar and so forth in terms of CO2 emissions. Now, how did they ever come up with this? It's a long story. You can read about it in this paper here. Now, the big question is carbon emissions for a carbon credit. This is the webpage of GDF Suez, now Energy in Paris. The owner of the Geral Dam on the Madeira River in Brazil, announcing that the world's largest renewable clean development mechanism project was approved. There's a lot more information on this on the carbon credit for dams. Not only do they emit carbon, but none of them are additional. They're not something that's being built just for carbon credit. So emissions are being emitted from the credit that's bought and not being compensated. Now, just a couple of weeks ago at the COP26, there was the release of the Science Panel for the Amazon report. I was the lead author of the chapter on aquatic ecosystems. It includes dams. And we came up with a categorical conclusion that no more Amazon dams with installed capacity greater than 10 megawatts should be built. To leave no loopholes for you can build dams if they have ways to minimize impacts and carefully choose a site or anything. Have a categorical decision, and that's very important here. So let me just end mentioning that there's these 3 volumes of this book that has over 50 papers in Portuguese about dams in the Amazon. A lot more information for the people here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Philip, and sorry for the lateness. And let's hear now David Blake. He comes from UK. He has been focused mainly on the lower Mekong Basin, countries of Southeast Asia. And he has participated in several conservation initiatives on the streams and rivers of Somerset. His PhD is focused on examining the irrigation development paradigm in northeast Thailand from critical political ecological perspectives. And he's presenting as a story of Mekong Fluviicide Redux, an ode to a once mighty river. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Okay, good afternoon, boa tarde. Firstly, thanks to the organisers for putting together this fantastic conference in what must have been challenging circumstances, given the uncertainty surrounding the pandemic and other factors. I'm thrilled to be able to present this personal perspective on the Mekong River. It's a river close to my heart, having worked in the Mekong Basin of Northeast Thailand and Laos since 1990 and visited and its tributaries at multiple locations over the years. I've worked as an activist for international rivers and other NGOs over the years and conducted extensive research on the underlying drivers of irrigation development and dams. My background is in aquaculture and fisheries before diversifying into other fields, but the interlocking theme has always been water management and governance. So I didn't actually expect to be presenting on this panel until a couple of days ago, but have tweaked my presentation a bit towards the end to reflect the title and recognize the work of dam opponents in trying to alter the dam development paradigm. So the title of my talk on Mekong Fluvicide Redux came about as a result of several factors. I don't know if anyone has heard of the term fluvicide, but I want to contextualize it and show how it's appropriate to the current situation on the Mekong River over the last couple of decades of what has transpired. Simply put, fluvicide is synonymous with riverside, a term popularized this year by George Monbiot in a live documentary highlighting the ecological plight of the River Wye. In particular, he was showing how the ecological condition has declined rapidly in recent years, primarily as a result of expansion of poultry farms in the upper basin, and secondly, weakening governance and regulation of sewage releases, which was actually mentioned by the Minister for Environment when she mentioned the problems in the UK at the moment. So fluvicide may be thought of as a subcategory of ecocide, but only applied to rivers. I'm sure some here will be familiar with the definition of ecocide as unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. And it's not, and that's from Stop Ecocide International, it's not a surprise what's happening on the Mekong, the rivers in Africa and South America. This was all known a long time ago. The term fluvicide predates riverside by 20 years and seems to have been coined by Tyson Roberts, whom I had got to know while working on dam EIAs in Laos back in the mid-90s. He wrote this paper in 2001, Killing the Mekong, China's Fluvicidal Hydropower cum Navigation Development Scheme. Because of time constraints, I won't read the whole lot, but if you want to just dip into it, essentially he laid out what he suspected would happen if China went ahead with a series of dams on the Upper Mekong and they wanted to build a navigation improvement scheme. That has gone ahead partially, but not completely. I also wrote an article in the World Rivers Review for International Rivers Network, as it was then. It's only International Rivers these days. 2001 as well. Proposed Mekong Dam Scheme in China threatens millions in downstream countries. And as I said, the Mekong not only plays a vital role in sustaining the livelihoods of millions of people downstream from Yunnan, its waters also support many unique wetland ecosystems, including the flooded forests of southern Laos and Cambodia, numerous lakes and swamps, and the seasonal flow of water into and out of the Cambodia's Great Lake, and laid out the suspected impacts if one or two of these dams went ahead. So what's actually happened in the last 20 years? Well, the map on the left is far too small to see the detail, but you can see the rough shape of the basin starts up actually in Tibet and then flows into China. Won't mention the politics of the upper basin. and goes down a very steep gradient in the Chinese section, and then briefly touches Burma, and then becomes the border with Laos and Thailand along a long section in the middle reaches, and then flows through Cambodia before emptying into the South China Sea in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. As you may gather from these maps, there's been an incredible explosion of dams across the basin, especially in Laos, but also Yunnan, and also in the Vietnam portion of the basin in the Central Highlands, and to a lesser extent, Cambodia. If look at the right-hand map, gives an idea of the scale of individual projects, both those in the darker blue, which are operational. As you can see, the dams up here are huge. The first one to be built was Man Wan Dam here, relatively small, and then subsequent dams have got bigger and bigger. This really big one here is called the Shao Wan Dam. The Shao Wan Dam here, and the Nuajadu Dam here. And then a lot of dams in Laos, the whole way down here, and then these ones in the Central Highlands, and a few in Cambodia. Few were concerned about the prospect of mainstream dams in 2001, despite China quietly building several without consulting downstream riparian states. And most attention in early 2000s was focused on the tributary dams in Laos and Cambodia, especially Nam Turn 2, post the World Commission on Dams report was very controversial, took a long time to approve, and was, a dam that international civil society and local groups in Thailand especially opposed strongly, and laid out the reasons why the impacts were not worth the costs. But everything changed in 2005 when the World Bank and the ADB approved the Nam Turn 2, and that decision seemed to open a floodgate of cheap finance throughout Asia, especially East Asia, for building dams in Southeast Asia. So dams have proliferated across the basin, and you could call it an orgy of dam building on both the major tributaries and the mainstream itself. Looking at the graph on the left, you can see what's happened. So in 2005 to 2009, there were nearly 60 dams, and then it boomed up to 140. This is across the basin, and then dropped down slightly 2015 to 2019. This graph shows, there was a steady stream in the previous years, but it wasn't a boom until post-2005. On the right-hand graph, this is showing a few of the flow stations. Chang Sen's in northern Thailand, Vientiane is the capital of Laos, Pak Se is in southern Laos, and then Stung Treng is in Cambodia. This shows above a baseline from 1960 to 1991 how flows have changed in the 1993 to 2013. So in the dry season months, there's a lot more water coming down, and most noticeable here at Vientiane, an almost 50% increase in the flows in April, slightly less noticeable down in Pak Se. And then in the delta and downstream, there's more water coming down in the dry season, but it's also noticeable in the wet season. There's been a decrease in flows. But these show sort of the broad brush picture. They don't show that there's daily fluctuations as the big dams up here release water and cause minor floods even in the dry season. This is as an average out. So actually there's great spikes above the long-term average in the dry season that affects people's livelihoods greatly. Floods, riverside gardens, etc. Sometimes they have fairs on the riverbanks, and those are flooded out. So let's move on. How did the river look in the 1990s when I first got to know it? It was a pretty healthy ecosystem, you could say. Markets were full of river fish. There were large sections of riverine forest still intact, and people could easily catch a lot of fish for their daily food, daily subsistence. There was flooded forest down in the lower part. This is in the Tonle Sap, the incredible rise and fall of the river system, the flood pulse system. And down at the boundary between Laos and Cambodia, where there's a series of falls, people would set up a range of ingenious traps to catch fish migrating upstream and downstream. This is for an upstream migration where they fall back into the traps. And you also had some huge mega fauna species such as the Mekong giant catfish. And then down along the riverside, you had rice fields fed by the predictable rise and fall of the river, like down in Cambodia in the delta, which relied on the floods to bring sediment and nutrients. So it was a healthy system back in the 90s, and there was also a wide range of incredible biodiversity, such as the freshwater Irrawaddy dolphin in the lower stretches. Jumping forward to today, how things change, well, extremely, you can't put into words the scale of change that's happened. Largely thanks to these giant dams like the Shaowan Dam, 292 meters tall, 4,200 megawatts. That was completed in 2010. Just downstream from it, there's another one even bigger in terms of storage, the Nuajadu Dam, 5,850 megawatts, completed in 2012, mostly designed to take power to the east of China. And then Laos has gone on this orgy of dam building. The most controversial and largest was this Sayaburi Dam. Creates a reservoir about 90 meters long with a 32-meter high dam at a great cost, 3.8 billion, and that was just completed a couple of years ago. At the far end of Laos down here, so the Sayaburi Dam is about there at the far end where it falls in over the waterfalls into Cambodia. On one of the channels, it just happened to be the most important channel for fish migration in the entire fall system. They blocked with a dam here that affects the local ecosystem. This is it, built by a Malaysian consortium and just commissioned last year. And not surprisingly, individual dams have huge and largely quantified impacts, but both locally and on the wider transboundary system. Each one of the mega dams in Yunnan would be massively damaging by itself, but taken together as a cascade, the negative effects are multiplied, cumulative, and act in synergy with other basin developments, such as road infrastructure, urban expansion, mining, deforestation, etc. This isn't even mentioning the tributary dams, which I could go into, but there's not a time. Apart from one, I'd just like to mention. It's called the Sepian Senan Noi Dam. It was nearly complete in August 2018. There was a lot of rainfall. It's a South Korean-built dam. Very complicated hydrology up there. It had a saddle dam blocking one section. That saddle dam failed. It collapsed. It caused a flood of water downstream that killed at least 71 people. That's the very minimum. Many people were probably killed without being recorded, and caused displacement of 7,000 people. So one of the obvious effects is that from a very turbid, sediment-rich river, it's changed now into a clear river, aquamarine over large sections. This was the difference between 2017 in December and 2019, a huge difference as those upstream Yunnan dams really start to kick in and have a huge effect on sediment capture. One journalist who went up to visit that section called the Mekong a bloated and blocked river, looking alternatively like a swollen dead worm or a broad lifeless lake. So clearer water, less sediment and nutrients reaching the delta. The flood pulse system is breaking down essentially as the troughs are evened out. And not surprisingly, that leads to a crash in the capture fisheries. Cumulative and cascading sociological impacts that was mentioned by Tyson and myself are now becoming very apparent. Fishermen all over are noticing a huge crash in fisheries. Other factors that are leading to the Mekong's demise beside dams include urban growth, industrialization, mining, agricultural intensification, deforestation, industrial forestry plantations, sand extraction and dredging, and changes in the societies more generally. So there's essentially serious overdevelopment of many of the sub-basins, especially in northeast Thailand and parts of Vietnam and Cambodia, but now we're seeing overdevelopment of the mainstream itself. Not time to expand on this. So for some reason the text has gone small up there, but I can summarize. Although I've painted a slightly grim picture of the state of the basin to this point and the ongoing fluvicide, it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge and give credit to some of the people and organizations that have attempted to stand up to the dammers and advocate for alternative pathways. These include a dedicated band of civil society organizations in Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, where limited democracy has been possible since 2000, and individuals or occasional ad hoc groups in Laos or Vietnam, which are both one-party states. An opposition to government politics, programs and projects is strictly sanctioned, and a number of protests do occur. This was against the Don Sahong Dam. You see WWF were involved in that. This was against the Sayaburi Dam in front of one of the organizations involved. And then this was also the Sayaburi Dam in front of a big hotel where a meeting was going on by the Mekong River Commission to basically allow the dam to go ahead. And these are Thai villagers protesting in the Mekong right opposite. If they'd gone into Lao waters, they would have been arrested immediately. So they had to stay in the Thai side of the river.
David, we need to come into a conclusion, please.
Yeah. So, quick mention of the MRC, which I just referred to there. It's supposed to be the Organization for Sustainable Development. There's the River Basin Organization, supposed to be looking after and managing the water resources. And I just picked out a quote from recently in September in the South China Morning Post from the CEO of the MRC, and Pik Hatda, which would read like a sort of promotion of the river some 20 years ago, but it's really not appropriate now while the whole system is crashing down right outside their windows. But apparently they're too blind to see it. They principally make studies. They have no power to stop any dam, but they facilitate processes which are supposed to be participatory, but are clearly not. So many of the NGOs tend to boycott their PNPCA, their participatory processes. And of course, despite the Mekong River Commission studies for the last 25 years, so where they say they want to have sustainable and equitable development, the large dams keep on being built regardless of whatever happens in the MRC offices and their funders, I should mention. So in conclusion, fluvicide is well advanced. Although the Mekong is repeatedly referred to as mighty in articles and reports, I argue that this is an epithet that is no longer valid. The previously biodiverse, abundant, and healthy river ecosystem that supported the richest freshwater fishery globally now appears to be in terminal death spiral, from which there will be little chance of recovery if the current dam development paradigm continues. This eventuality was predicted by Tyson Roberts in 2001 in his fluvicide paper, although the scale and pace of dam construction has been far greater than he or I could have imagined, especially in Laos. The flood of dam financing from within Asia could not have been predicted at that time, and it is the factor that is fueling most of the development and thus the fluvicide. Maybe the Mekong will go the way of many of China's rivers, essentially biologically depleted or dead. And China is the main elephant in the room these days, although the Western organizations like the World Bank must take a lot of responsibility. I would refer to this same time as I wrote my paper in World Rivers Network, and that Tyson wrote his paper. Arundhati Roy, the Indian author, said, to intervene in such a massive way in such a complex process, it's like putting a jackboot into a spider's web. I like that. What kind of civilization is it when you teach men in college to look at a river and imagine pouring concrete into it? I had an email from the leader of WWF's Greater Mekong Water Initiative earlier this year. We were talking about the way that the river was going. And he confided in me that being a powerless witness to the destruction of the Mekong has been and remains very painful and predictable, yet we were called catastrophists at the time. And now that the disaster unfolding is worse than what we anticipated, it is still not enough to trigger any meaningful coordinated actions on the scale of the need, far beyond sad. And then I'd leave with some real heroes who've been trying to stop, either individually or with their organizations, the worst of these dams. Kru Thi works in northern Thailand, right next to the Mekong, and he's tirelessly been fighting both the government in Thailand and its organizations, but also the Chinese government upstream. Vanida, or Pim Mod, died in 2007. She was another tireless hero fighting for one dam that was part of the World Commission on Dams, case studies called Pak Mun Dam. She deserves recognition. And lastly, Sombat Sompon, who was disappeared in 2012, was also another campaigner against maldevelopment, including dams in Laos. But unfortunately, he has disappeared, presumed dead. And various others who've risked their reputation, liberty, and lives for the river and its people. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for all these beautiful but also concerning stories. It's impressive on how from different parts of the world, so distant and so close in the kind of struggles. So thank you so much for bringing your inquiries into this summit as well, and inspire and motivate us to keep on addressing this. And now it's time. Well, time has passed, and it's already 6, which was the end time for today's session. But still, we would like to give a little time for 2 or 3 questions, comments from the audience. So I would invite you, for those who would like to pose either a direct question or a question for all of our panel, and also the online audience, you can write questions. We have here a way also to bring them. So please approach the microphone. There are 2 here in the front. Anyone that would like to make a question or a comment after these stories of heroes, you're very welcome. I thought Katarina was making a question. Anyone? A question or a comment? Please, can you come and use this microphone? These are COVID measures. We need to have the microphone here so we can disinfect between talks. Thank you very much.
Hello to everybody. I'm coming from Greece from a little NGO, and it was very interesting, all these things that we have heard. We don't have so big rivers and not so big problems. We have small rivers, but big problems also. And I want to mention something about the colleague of North Macedonia. I want to thank you for two reasons. I want to congratulate you first and to thank you for the reason that you use the North Macedonian as a country, because I think that it was very positive, this collaboration between the two governments. But I want to ask you about what is you have to enforce all the governments to do something, or you have seen some difference between the governments that they have governed the North Macedonia country all these years? Because this is, for all the Balkan countries, I think that is a very critical issue, this. What kind of governments we have in every moment, and how this government confront all the environmental issues, and mostly about the national parks and the rivers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is it switched on? Yeah. Thanks for the question. Well, what kind of governments we have? We always have corrupt governments, don't we? I mean, when it comes to hydropower. But no, I mean, the difficult issue, I did not mention it because I didn't want to be very pessimistic, but we were running the campaign in a time that we considered to be a regime where we were really afraid to speak our minds and to go out in the public, and this is why we didn't get too much of the support from people, because people were afraid. But very soon after the government was changed in 2017, 2018, we saw a difference in policies. The two projects were permanently removed from the energy strategy of the country, which means hopefully they never come back. But we are slowly basically getting there. Sometimes when governments openly say that they're very green and want to promote environmental protection, it's only on paper, it's a declaration, it's not happening in practice. And I think this is maybe the issue now with the green agenda, with the European green agenda. All the governments want to say, yes, we are doing it, but then how are we doing this? Or are we doing it at all? Or is it just a declaration? And this is something that I want to refer back to what was said during the previous panel, that we are the ones who maybe should be giving also the solutions and the proposals of how we see the development in our regions and how we see the environmental protection go hand in hand with economic development. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Please.
I have a question for Philip Fernside. You know, beside all the history of dams, do you see any rising hope for stopping some of the others that are around the corner, like Babaquara or the Tapajós dams? Is there anything, or do we have to wait until Bolsonaro has been removed from this position?
Hello? Okay. Well, there are various parts of the answer to that. First of all, it's important not to be fatalistic about these things. That when people talk about the Amazon, often wind up just assuming that everything is going to be destroyed, the forest will burn up, the rivers will be destroyed with dams and so forth. And that just leads to people doing nothing or deciding to worry about some other problem. And of course, the opposite is also possible. Someone who's an optimist and thinks everything's taking care of itself with governance and so forth also leads to people doing nothing. So that you have to remain focused on the problem. In terms of Bolsonaro, there isn't time for him to do all the things that he's planning in terms of dams, which takes quite a lot of time. When he came into office, during the first month in office, he announced a huge dam on the Trombetas River, north of tributary, north of the Amazon, that was mostly in Quilombola land. These are descendants of escaped African slaves who lived in the forest and so forth and have the same rights as indigenous peoples, and who are a special target of Bolsonaro. And that has huge impacts. It's also just upstream of one of the largest breeding areas for turtles in the Amazon. Anyway, it hasn't happened yet, and he only has a year and 3 months left in office until another president, which of course could be him, but according to the polls, it's probably not going to be him. But in any case, the things that are being set in motion can carry on, like these bills in the National Congress to open up indigenous areas to hydroelectric dams. Things can very easily pass in this few months ahead. And then that opens up, the scope for these big dams in future governments. And of course, future governments are not necessarily against dams. Remember that the Workers' Party, Lula's party, Lula is the one who's ahead in the polls for the election. It's the party that built the dams on the Madeira River and also Belo Monte. So I have to see what happens. But it's very important not to be fatalistic about it.
Thank you, Philip. I think we have time for one question more, last one. Question or comment, if there's any. Also, the audience online, if it feels like we can receive questions. Here we have. Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful talks. I would like to ask you all if there is anything that you think you could ask to other countries or to other organizations that could support your work or double your impact or something. Sometimes I think that you do all by yourself, locally or nationally, but have you ever thought about, well, if we could have the support or we could do something else with other people's support? I don't know if there would be a wish that you could say, yes, this could be very positive. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Anyone that is inspired to answer?
Let me just answer a part of it. But one of the things is in the result of all of these European companies, some of which I mentioned there, that obviously are doing things that they would never do in Europe itself. And certainly most of these dams we're talking about, a dam like Belo Monte, for example, would never be built in Europe. The people would just not stand for it. But these dams being built somewhere else to make aluminum and so on and so forth, doesn't result in the same sort of revulsion or resistance to doing it. So I think that's one place where Europe could have a major role. Certainly, Europe is very important in terms of investments and money that is spent, and also its influence in international organizations like the World Bank. And of course, for imports, certainly in terms of Amazonia, the deforestation is something that has a lot of influence from importing countries that include Europe, and China, of course, is the biggest in the world. So what happens with those importing countries also has a big influence.
Thank you, Philip. Anyone? Robert, please.
Yeah, one of the things that has been done, but we can continue to do, is as we face challenges and harassment from the government, at times we have arrest without any reason because they want to threaten you not to talk and so on and so forth. Actually, one of the partner organizations in Uganda whom we have been implementing activities on Aswa Dam were arrested. My colleagues were arrested last 2 weeks. And we know that because of the network and sharing information, there has been a lot of sign-on letters which placed a lot of pressure on the government to make sure they were released, and they were released. And this we can continue to do more effectively, more especially for different, especially like our government having been part of the Commonwealth, part of the... So if you ask your embassies in the country to also say, this is happening, please make sure this is a violation of human rights, let these people be released, they will listen. 2 is China is running like it is not in this world. And I think it is in all ways belonging to UN. Maybe we need to combine our heads and thinking and try to lobby the UN to make sure that they talk to China to behave. Yes, because why are they doing things as if they are not part of humanity on Earth? So I think that I leave it to you.
Thank you so much, Robert.
If I may comment, you said, what would be your wish? And this is very tempting, you know. I would say if our decision makers start making decisions based on scientific data and facts and not on their personal opinions or industry interests, that would be something that I would basically call for, regardless of any government, region, continent. We need to, well, I see the role of civil society also as a translator or interpreter of this scientific data to the decision makers, because, you know, we've all spoken to scientists, we know how it goes, but definitely being this bridge, we can all be this bridge between science and decision makers, and help them make the right decisions based on facts and not on opinions. Thanks.
Please.
Yeah, good question. And I could add another couple of things, sort of in addition to what Philip mentioned, looking at the companies in Europe and the West that are involved. A couple of years ago, I got dressed up as a gibbon and in a gibbon suit, and lolloped around the car park of Siemens at its headquarters in the UK with Greenpeace, with some Munduruku tribal elders present, and basically embarrassed Siemens about their involvement in the Tapajos river dams. So organizations organizing similar things to embarrass the companies involved, and protests. Also, mindful consumption of the products you consume. Are they coming from dam-supporting companies? And lastly, in connection to my talk, doing everything that organizations are able to make ecocide a crime against humanity, and thus fluvicide would be a subsector of that and would become, and try to promote that term, fluvicide. I don't think anyone's used it since 20 years ago until today. If there is on the internet, please show me. But I think it's a term that has reached its time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And thank you so much, all of you, for bringing your contribution and so rich conversation. Thank you. Okay, very fast. We need to close. I'm receiving signs also.
I'm from Montenegro and Balkans, and when we succeed to gather the people around the cause, and that is hard, then we face legal problems. Yeah, the law somehow always favors the investors. So I would like to hear from you and from everybody who will present tomorrow, if anybody has some recommendations of free law aid and advocates and lawyers, so we could use that, and of course your experience in these legal fights, because that's a very, very hard part of the fight. Thank you. Sorry for the time.
Thank you. We'll have a session around law in the last day of the summit. Where we'll have a roundtable around it. So I would maybe invite us to close because it's really time and we need to also to respect that. And thank you for the question. So I hope we can continue with the conversations. And also during tomorrow and the day after, and also during dinner time. We have now time for dinner from 6:30 to 8:30. And the day is not finished because there's also at 9 the River Film Fest. It's happening in Teatro da Luz. So I hope to see you there and see you tomorrow here at 9.
So about the social part tonight, we are heading now to a restaurant. Those of ones who've put your names on the list, and then to the film fest. The film fest is from 9 to 11, and there's a bus that goes out of Avenida de Berna, this big avenue here, and that stops in front of Teatro da Luz, the theater where the film fest will be. You can check this on the online program. There's the number of the bus and everything. So thank you. And